it would indisputably be this man, James Tipton. A man who has published well over 1,000 poems and a long and distinguished career that includes works of fiction and essays as well. He has unselfishly mentored nearly every writer who has passed his way, myself included. At the basis of all of Jim's writing is the Quaker's loving kindness towards humanity, though he tends to favor women. You know his column in the Oho, Hearts at Work. You may be acquainted with his recent collections of poetry in the Japanese short forms, tanka and haiku, mostly about his fascination with and desire for beautiful women. Jim now has a new book that explores an exciting variation on this old theme. It's called To Love for 1,000 Years. What a treat you are in for, as he informs us today of the ecstatic tradition of poetry and reads from his new book, derived in spirit from this tradition. Jim combines poetry and performance in a combination you will not soon forget.
I found my old German harmonica a few days ago. So. Okay. I used to play with the Boston harmonica. Joyful, you should have this sheet in front of you. And we're going to sing this together because this has many elements that you will find in the ecstatic poetry in Hindu, Muslim, and Christian traditions. So let's sing this, and all of us are familiar with this. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, opening to the sun above. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the dark of doubt away. Giver of immortal gladness, fill us with the light. More gusto, keep going, more gusto. All thy works with joy surround thee, earth and heaven reflect thy rays. Stars and angels sing around thee, center of unbroken praise. Field and forest, vale and mountain, flowering meadow, flashing sea, chanting bird and flowing fountain, call us to rejoice. Keep going, more heart. Thou art giving and forgiving, ever blessing, ever blessed. Wellspring of the joy of living, ocean depth of happy rest. Thou our Father, Christ our brother, all who live in love are thine. Teach us how to love each other, lift us to the joy divine. One more time. Mortals join the mighty chorus, which the morning stars began. Love divine is reigning o'er us, binding all within its band. Henry Van Dyke's version, 1907. The original German ones were from Schiller's poem, Ode to Joy. And this song, Hymn to Joy we just sang, the Joyful, Joyful We Adore Thee, is one of the few songs clearly in the tradition of the ecstatic poets. You do not find a militant God, my God is better than your God sort of thing. You don't find sin. You don't find doctrine. You find what? Joy, celebration, love of the natural world. Teach us how to love each other. This is all in the tradition of the ecstatic poets. And this is not mainstream conservative orthodox stuff that Beethoven was playing around with and that this song plays around with. Let's look at some of the words. Joyful, God of glory. The word glory is derived from a Greek word that means a golden aura around all of us. And when our hearts wake up, we can look at each other and see that sometimes, that golden haze, and around everything that lives. So glory, glorious, is from that word. You look glorious to me. God of glory, Lord of love, primary word in all of the ecstatic poets. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee. It's right out of Hinduism. Om Mani Padme Hum, flower of the lotus, open up inside of me. Om Mani Padme Hum, we can do that for an hour as well. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, opening to the sun above. Enormous emphasis on light falling down into our lives, or coming to us from each other. Love divine reigning over us. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness. Throw that stuff away. Drive the dark of doubt away. Natural images, field and forest, vale and mountain, flowery meadow, flashing sea, chanting bird and flowing fountain, call us to rejoice in thee. Teach us how to love each other, lift us to the joy divine, so forth. Joyful, joy-filled. And I think when we sing that with Beethoven's melody that he struggled with so long and so many years, he first began working with this when he was 22 years old with the Schiller poem, trying to get that into what he wanted. So you have this wonderful Ninth Symphony filled with chaos, running off in every direction. And a lonely voice starts getting a piece of a melody, and then more voices, and we finally end up with this thing that gives us, still gives me goosebumps. So, Beethoven, born in 1770, had a counterpart in England named William Wordsworth, also born in 1770. And Wordsworth talks about something similar. Wordsworth says our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. So that most of our lives, we are asleep. We are asleep most of our lives. And our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. He says, the soul that rises with us and cometh from afar, it comes, this energy in us comes not in entire forgetfulness. But most of us at this point in our lives have forgot most of who we are. But nevertheless, we arrive here not in entire forgetfulness, not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of, David? Glory. Glory. But trailing clouds of glory do we come. We can reconnect with these clouds of glory and experience those again in our lives. So these poems out of a later Western tradition are very similar in theme to the Islamic ecstatic poets, the early Christian ecstatic poets, the Hindu ecstatic poets, and I now will read you a few of their things. It's sort of interesting having this little room here and everybody clustered in here together. I kind of like it, actually. I was doing a Sundance last night at midnight. I was trying to call in some old debts from the woman above. And as my grandmother used to say, I was out there dancing stork naked. Margaret's joke reminded me of one I remember from years ago. Adam wakes up one sunny morning, coming out, rolls over, looks at this beautiful woman lying beside him, and he says, Eve, Eve, wake up, wake up. This is the day to turn over a new leaf. Meister Eckhart was a German theologian, always in trouble with the Catholic Church, as most mystics are in trouble with their religious structure. All of the ecstatic poets have more in common with each other than they do with the structure in which they find themselves. And so the Hindu, the Muslim, the Christian mystic are brothers. Notice in Beethoven's song, in the hymn, it is Christ our Savior,
Brother.
Christ our brother. And many of us can accept that in nice ways, I think. So Meister Eckhart was a German theologian, as you mentioned. His work was suppressed. After his death, his work was largely destroyed. Some was discovered in the late 1800s. Here are a few things that remain from that wonderful Meister Eckhart. And you can see why he might have gotten into some trouble. Is this not also a holy trinity? The sky, the earth, our bodies. And communion? First seek that from your lover's lips before anything offered from a priest. He was facing charges of heresy when he decided to leave this world. Here's another poem by Meister Eckhart. It is a lie, any talk of God that does not comfort. 1,000 years old. It is a lie, any talk of God that does not comfort. Pretty nice, huh? And another piece called An Insidious Idol, he writes something I think is very contemporary. I find nothing more offensive than a God who could condemn human instincts in us that time in all its wonder have made perfect. I find nothing more destructive to the well-being of life than to support a God that makes you feel unworthy and in debt to it. I imagine erecting churches to such a strange God will assure endless wars that commerce loves. A God that could frighten is not a God, but an insidious idol and weapon in the hands of the insane. A couple of days ago, I came across these lines that I thought were sort of related by a Texan named Butch Hancock. And he writes, Butch writes, life in Lubbock taught me two things. One is that God loves you and you're going to burn in hell. The other is that sex is the most awful, filthy thing on earth and you should save it for someone you love. All of us are familiar with St. Francis of Assisi. He, of course, penned the probably second most famous prayer in the language in Western Europe, in the Western tradition. How does it begin? Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. My own personal variation is, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, preferably in an advisory capacity. Well, in a poem titled The Sacraments, and this reminds me of Meister Eckhart, in the poem titled The Sacraments, he says, I once spoke to my friend, an old squirrel, about the sacraments. St. Francis, of course, of all the Christian mystics, is associated with what? Animals. I once spoke to my friend, an old squirrel, about the sacraments. He got so excited and ran into a hollow in his tree and came back holding some acorns, an owl feather, and a ribbon he had found. And I just smiled and said, yes, dear, you do understand. The most famous poet of the Persian world, and I know today still outsells the Quran, is a poet named Hafiz. born in Shiraz, which is now part of southwestern Iran. And Hafiz lived about the same time as Chaucer in England. 100 years after the Sufi poet Rumi. Hafiz was a Sufi as well, sort of the mystical offshoot of Islam, persecuted by the hierarchies. And he wrote an estimated 5,000 poems, and we now have remaining about 500 to 700 poems because they were destroyed by the clerics after his death. Daniel Ladinsky, who has done versions I'm using here, says that for Hafiz, the heart's imperative, its destiny, is the glorious unfolding of love. Most of these poets, as I mentioned, do have lots in common. So Hafiz and St. Francis are pretty much brothers, as is Christ and Kabir. I start thinking about what I just said and pondering, and then I forget that I'm supposed to be going on to something else. Okay, if God invited you to a party, this is about all of you here, and it's written for all of us here, this poem. It says, "To open circle." If God invited you to a party and said, everyone in the ballroom, everyone in this room tonight, everyone in this room will be my special guest, how would you then treat them when you arrived? All these guests of God. How would you then treat them when you arrived? Indeed, indeed, and Hafiz knows that there is no one in this world who is not standing upon his jeweled dance floor. So that's one he wrote for you. Another Hafiz poem I like a lot, to try to put into practice. One regret that I am determined not to have when I am lying upon my deathbed is that we did not kiss enough. Last night I was listening to that great Leonard Cohen album, Leonard Cohen, The Tower of Song. Some of you have that?
Yes.
One of my favorites. And in his intro to that terrific song, There Ain't No Cure for Love, he says, "I've studied deeply the philosophies and the religions, but cheerfulness kept breaking through." I think I should read that again. That's so good. "I studied deeply in the philosophies and the religions, but cheerfulness kept breaking through." Also on that album, he's talking in London a few years ago, and he said, "This is the first time I've been on the London stage in 15 years. And, last time I was on this stage, I was 68 years old. Just a wild-eyed boy with a crazy dream." Another Hafiz poem. "The great religions are the ships. The great religions are the ships. Poets, the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard." I have 2 classrooms. "The great religions are the ships, poets, the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard." I've been in poetry my whole life. From the time I slid out on the stainless steel table and the nurse looked up and said 607 or something. And my parents always sort of worried about it. And when I lived in Colorado, I thought about printing a bumper sticker that would have sold well among the poets, that would have read, "Don't tell my parents I'm a poet. They think I play piano in a whorehouse." Here's a sweet little Hafiz poem titled, "I Am Really Just a Tambourine." Good poetry makes the universe admit a secret, makes the universe say to us, I am really just a tambourine. Grab hold, play me against your warm thigh. And then he did write another poem for the open circle. And it's titled A Beautiful Creature. Appropriate, huh? All of you beautiful creatures, this is for you. There is a beautiful creature living in a hole you have dug. And so at night I set fruit and grains and little pots of wine and milk beside your soft earthen mounds. And I often sing to you, but still, my dear, you do not come out. I have fallen in love with someone who is hiding inside of you. We should talk about this problem, otherwise I will never leave you alone. Well, in the remaining 2 hours we have here together, I thought I'd read a few poems of my own, but first I wanted to mention that Maya Overkirk, where are you, Maya?
Right here.
Oh, you're back down here in front. I thought you were going to the back. Maya is out on this street and several doors up and has some balloons out front. And she's invited 6 riders for a pre-Valentine's sale of books and her own beautifully crafted jewelry, pieces of art. David Bryan, who spoke last week, is one of those authors, has a very fine book, and you should invite him to do a poetry reading here sometime. David is also doing is it one day?
Yes, one-day workshop.
A one-day workshop on fear and shame, and that will be at the new Oasis Cloud Cafe.
No, it's going to be in my house.
Oh, in your house, okay. You have a flyer on that?
Sign up on email, I'll give it to you.
Oh, okay, yeah, so he'll send you the flyer. Margaret will also be there, who read here 2 weeks ago. And people like Mel Goldberg, Bob Dryden, Bill Frayer, and they will all have the books there. My new book is actually also available at Diane Pearl's, and Diane has done so much for all of us writers and artists carrying our books there, and has been a great support. It's also at Coffee and Bagels on the highway. I should also mention that Jim Spivey is putting together an interesting program on self-hypnosis, and where is Jim? That's 4 weeks long? 5 weeks long, beginning March 5th. March 5th, 5 weeks long. So see Jim about that. So we have lots of activities coming out from people. Storytellers, on Valentine's Day, we have 5 or 6 authors reading short stories. I think the title is Stories of Love and Lust. I didn't think they'd invite me because I don't have anything along those lines. What? Yeah, see? And so anyway, that is right here in this spot on Tuesday at 4 o'clock.
And there's flyers outside.
And there are flyers outside. So literature and open circle seem to have lots of connections and things going on. So I'm going to read a few of these poems I've written after being immersed in these Sufi ecstatic poets. I read a few of them from St. Francis of Assisi and from Hafiz and from, nothing from Rumi. Tukaram is another one. Meister Eckhart, and there are several dozen that we would put into that category. These are some of mine that sort of owe a lot of debt to those people. This book is titled To Love for 1,000 Years. It's also bilingual. Amor que dura 1000 años. And Ritz asked me today to read them only in Spanish. So I'm going to read them in English, but they are in Spanish, so it's also a perfect Valentine gift to give to all of your Spanish Mexican friends, your maids, your gardeners. I've always been quite democratic about poetry and have found audiences in blue-collar workers that have really been wonderful audiences. When I used to pump gas at the Purdue University Airport, it was a commercial airport, we would have lots of downtime, sometimes half an hour between things, and the linemen would sit around shooting the bull. And so I spent one whole summer reading them poetry, particularly to Walt Whitman. They liked Walt Whitman a lot, and so I'd read these long passages from Walt Whitman to these gas pumpers at the airport. And I think when we do have poems that are real poems, they tend to be accessible to a very, very broad audience. Most of the stuff in the New Yorker I can toss out the window. And T.S. Eliot's okay if you've read his last 68 books that he's read, you know, then you can sort of figure some of that stuff out. But anyway, I'm going to begin here. If we love only one person, if we love only one person, that is obsession and not love. No, the end of the poem. If we love only one person, that is obsession and not love. If we love only one religion, one thing is certain: we are not religious. If we love only one house, we do not know what home really is. When we look deeply into the eyes of a stranger and think, this woman also is my wife, or this man also is my husband, then we are beginning to make some progress. And what about that old crone and that old derelict? Yes, they also are father and mother. Some days, all the women in the world are wearing a single skirt, and all the men fit into a single pair of shoes. On those days, we no longer blame ourselves because it has taken us so long to learn to love. On those days, we can say it is God who has made us crazy. The Sufis like playing around with, the ecstatic poets like playing around with God, where God becomes kind of the butt of some of their jokes, and sometimes God shows up here or there, and so they have a lot of fun playing with the notion of God, very different from the standard anthropomorphic God developed to fit a particular culture. In Spanish, I will just read a couple of lines. Si solamente amamos a una persona, eso es obsesión, más no es amor. Si solamente amamos una religión, solo hay una certeza, no somos religiosos. These are translated by a poet in Mexico City and film critic, Flor Aguilera Garcia. And people tell me that there are good translations, awfully good translations.
It's only the pronunciation.
Right. Yeah, right. So that's why I'm not reading them in Spanish. This next poem is based on something that actually happened to me. And it's titled, The Day I Found God Washed Ashore. What did I do with my water? Appropriate.
Yes.
The day I found God washed ashore, He was barely breathing until I began to apply mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. For a few minutes I was really worried. I thought I might have to help organize the funeral of God. But then as I was breathing into Him, He began breathing back into me. And finally, one eye, crusty with the sea, opened and winked. Before I could say a word, He transformed into a beautiful woman. And then into another beautiful woman. And then into another beautiful woman. And He has been doing that ever since, every day of my life. That day, God washed ashore, unconscious and barely breathing, was the day I really got serious about religion. I wrote the first drafts of all of these here in Ajijic, about 2 blocks from here, when we were living on Nicholas Problem several years ago. Everybody's familiar with all this stuff about soulmates over the years and things like that. This is titled, what's all this talk about finding the right one? What's all this talk about finding the right one? It's all very simple. God hid a woman inside each man. And God hid a man inside each woman. And so, to you men, the very woman you are looking for is deep inside of you. And to you women, the very man you are looking for is deep inside of you. We are the perfect one we have always been looking for. Why then do you continue to run naked all night long through every street in Ajijic looking for your perfect mate? This is titled, Try to Kiss the Person Beside You. Please wait till I finish the poem. Each side. Try to kiss the person beside you right now, without thoughts wildly and randomly flying up like frightened ducks in a marsh filled with hunters. Try to kiss the person beside you right now, while God in sensual form is still hovering in your lips. Try to kiss the person beside you before God once again flies off to a foreign country. Try to do this right now. Okay, get at it. Both sides. Go ahead. We've got to devote 5 minutes to this.
Get my camera ready.
Okay. One more time. Okay. It's like the Hafiz poem. The one regret we will not have is what? That we did not kiss enough.
Or hug enough.
Or what?
Or hug enough.
Or hug enough. That's not like a town in... Well,
And a cup of ice cream.
what?
Hug enough, sounds like a cup of ice
Hug enough. Yeah. I see you have, what's his name?
cream. Sammy.
Oh, Sammy with us. Yeah, good.
It's available for kisses.
Good. You want to lift Sammy up? Yeah. Hola. So in all of these poems, there's really a sharp focus on the urgency of the moment and waking up into the moment and acting, bringing love into the moment and not putting it off until next year or not putting it off until your next trip to the United States. Now, it's like in Aldous Huxley's novel Island, there's a parrot that flies in and it knows 3 words. It says, here and now, here and now, here and now. And every time the conversation gets to be too intellectual in that book, which it does, this parrot flies in like an alter ego of Aldous Huxley and it says, here and now, here and now, here and now. So I often thought I should buy a parrot and teach him to say that, but I'm afraid in my house that it would, well. Yeah. We no longer look for God in pieces of stale bread. And this communion bread has gotten worse and worse. I buy these styrofoam packets of these styrofoam communion wafers. You ever try those things? They turn into glue on your tongue. Man, and I was in a Catholic church in Denver where you get a little kit like these crackers with cheese, you know? And you rip it open, and one side is wine, and people are sitting there with the wine down there. And then they stick these styrofoam wafers in their mouth and sit down and say hello to everybody. And in Puerto Vallarta, you buy in the street market now. One of the treats you buy to eat are these communion wafers. In all different colors. Yeah. So I bought some and took them home to a priest friend of mine in Colorado. Packets of communion wafers. God almighty, things had changed from when I was a kid. Although, we never had communion. I came from a Quaker family on my father's side, actually. We no longer look for God in pieces of stale bread. And it's worse than that. We no longer look for God in pieces of stale bread or in books so sacred that in fact they have no interest to us. Or in old cathedrals filled with the mad and the dead. In our own time, God is hiding in relationships. God is secretly putting a fine piece of me into you, and a fine piece of you into me. There's nothing we can do about it now. It is beginning to become very obvious. We are all pregnant with each other. I am with several of you, actually. Keep losing my water here.
It'll pass.
Here's another true story, actually. I think some famous astronomer wrote about this. The day God kissing God was the day the universe began. That was the day God and God, that doubly divine mouth, kissed into being the heavenly bodies. Would that we also could kiss divinity into the moment. As our lips swim toward each other, seeking no ship on the horizon, or looking back at familiar shore. We must learn to kiss, expecting nothing further than our own sweet hearts swelling in our lips. We must learn to kiss, expecting nothing further than our own sweet hearts swelling in our lips to touch each other. When God started kissing God, the universe began. Who knows what will happen between us? For some curious reason, my Mexican wife says this is her favorite poem in the book, and I would have guessed it to be the least favorite of the poems. It's titled, You Created Me in Your Own Image. You created me in your own image? Hardly. Were this true, I would certainly have been at least somewhat successful in the business world. I would have studied a reflection of something other than these human limbs I daily lean on. I would like to accept those strange teachings. It would be a comfort. But forgive me, God, for in truth, I learned the shape of my own body by sleeping all night against the bodies of many beautiful women. You see what I mean? I mean, why does... This one I'm not totally convinced about yet, but I'm working on it. A woman with beautiful breasts. Something new in my poetry. A woman with beautiful breasts is like a blacksmith who hammers the iron ring into our nose and ties a strong rope to it. A woman with beautiful breasts is like a blacksmith who hammers the iron ring into her nose and ties a strong rope to it. I come from a long family of blacksmiths. God does this to tease us toward that beauty, that when we lift our eyes a little higher, is 100 times more beautiful than those very beautiful breasts. God is offering a gold ring to replace the iron one, that, should the truth be known, we ourselves hammered into place. My dad actually is a lot like I am. He's still alive at 98, and he's always enjoyed the company of women, and I don't mean chasing women, but I mean loving women and being around women, and I don't know if you call it flirting when you are making comments that are adulation, but he's very much like I am this way, and at age 98, in the nursing home, he's still this way. And so I got an email from my sister last week, and he said he lives in this dementia unit, dementia and Alzheimer's, and about 7 people there with a nurse around the clock. And they brought in a new Alzheimer woman 2-3 weeks ago, and they don't have any locks in the doors for safety. Patients. And the nurse called my sister and said that she had gone into his room that morning to wake him up, and this new woman who had moved in was there sound asleep in bed with him, and his arm was draped across her like he used to do with my mother. I just thought that was so sweet. I understand we only have 5 minutes here. Okay, let me move on here. There's a little dog poem. I like dogs. We have a dog here. Everybody knows God spelled backwards is dog. But did you know that God likes to play? Did you know that on some days God selects a dog in Ajijic to hide in? So, it is very important to say Buenos dias to every dog you meet. And for that moment to look upon that dog with deep love, just to be safe. Well, I guess I need to wind up here in a couple of minutes. Let me skip through a bunch of these. We are gathered here tonight to organize the Mountain Rescue Team. We are gathered here this morning to organize the Mountain Rescue Team. This particular Mountain Rescue Team will wander the mountains of the endless heart. Those who wish to be a part of this team must know it will not be easy. There are people in these mountains who have been lost a long time. There are people in these mountains who have been looking for companions a long time. Sometimes we will find a hermit there who never wished to be a hermit. For these searches, we will travel light, knowing that on our back we must sometimes carry the mountain itself. Though we walk naked, we must always carry enough for 2. What medicine we will need, we can carry inside of us. We know that kisses can heal. We know there is someone in this very room who has not been hugged in 10 years. I was teaching an in-service workshop to junior high teachers in Michigan at Interlochen Arts Academy many years ago. These are women 55 to 65 getting re-credentialed to teach creative writing in their schools. And so I was doing a lot of Sufi chants and dances and stuff, and we were having a lot of fun. And a lot of these were single older women devoted to their teaching. And on the final day, I had everybody doing this Sufi dance, Ram, Jai, Jai, Ram, and we're winding around in a tight circle. I have everybody holding hands, and then I'm at the center, and I'm turning like this until we're in just an absolute tight mass of people chanting and swaying. And then as we let this wind down an hour later, we began breaking up, and one of the women, there's tears streaming down her face. And I said, Ethel, are you okay? And she said, yes. She said, yes. She says, I just want to say, this is the first time I've been hugged in 10 years. Well, one final poem. Also based on a true story, incidentally. St. Francis of Assisi and St. Clare met. She's his counterpart in the evolution of Franciscans. St. Francis of Assisi and St. Clare met one night on a dark hill, and they felt much joy in being together. So much joy that their hearts filled with the love of God. Then their bodies began to glow until they lit up the whole sky for miles around. This is talked about to this very day. So may our conversations on our own dark hill be filled so much with God that we also light up the sky, that we also might be talked about for 1,000 years. Thank you.
We're going to open the floor now to some questions you might have for Jim. We will not be passing a mic, but I'll recognize a hand. Nobody.
The first poem that you read called to my mind an Arab proverb, and the proverb is, "The home of the wise man is the universe."
Good. Emerson says, "Go where he will, the wise man is at home." It's also related. There are wonderful Arab poems. Sometimes this anonymous poem is attributed to Arab tradition. Yesterday is but a dream. You know that beautiful thing? Yesterday is but a dream. Tomorrow is but a vision. But today well lived makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Isn't it? But the Arabs have really wonderful poetry. Yes, Jaritza.
One of your poems, one of my favorite authors is Alexander King. And you said you should history. He wrote a book, or he wrote a theme on that. He talked about kissing her more was his muse, his inspiration, a woman that inspired him to create and to be successful.
Nice.
And I thought that was nice. I should have kissed her more.
Very nice. Be a good book title.
It is a book.
It is.
Oh, it is. That is the title.
So you had to have it. You had to have it.
Well, there goes that idea. Other comments, questions, contributions?
Thank you for dancing last night.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah.
And I didn't get pneumonia. Yeah. I didn't dance quite hard enough, but it's close enough, isn't it?
Well, we had a lot of, I think we feel like we gained a lot of enlightenment, and we're very entertained at the same time. That's the best kind. So I'll go on and describe next Sunday, February 19th. Pete Soderman is going to explain how we can take advantage of our neuroplasticity to mitigate the effects of aging and make fundamental changes in our lives. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain and nervous system to change structurally and functionally as a result of input from the environment. Pete is a teacher, a student, and a writer, and a participant in bringing about the computer revolution. I have the wrong verb there. It was. Oh well. So you can turn your cell phones back on, pick up your coffee cups, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you.